From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. So let's just put a big fat old asterisk on yesterday's page of the Illinois Political Diary, because that was the day when, among other things, Illinois ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. Now it's only 2 states shy of passage after 36 years. But the other, and I would make the argument that probably even bigger story, is that the Senate passed what both Republicans and Democrats assure us is a balanced state budget. The House is probably going to take it up today, so by the time you see this program, Illinois could have, and the governor will probably have, signed an actual budget with numbers. Can you believe it? And the really big news from that Age of Aquarius budget, at least for the purposes of our discussion today, is that it allocates $407 million for early childhood and K-12 education. And that could mean the second year in a row, if my numbers are correct, where a little extra money is finding its way to the Chicago public schools. So now the question is, are they going to spend it properly and wisely? Well, there's nobody better equipped to begin to answer some of those questions than our 2 guests today, because they've been covering CPS for years, and they have written between them some of the biggest mind-blowing exposés of wrongdoing at our schools. And I am referring, of course, to 2 of the best in the business, both long-term friends of Chicago Newsroom, I might point out. Lauren FitzPatrick is here from the Chicago Sun-Times.
Hi, Ken.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
And our almost very own Sarah Karp from WBEZ, who I still think you still probably hold the record, even though you've had fewer appearances in the last 6 months or so, but been on the show more than almost anybody else, and I'm so glad to have you both back here. So could we just begin with the breaking news of the day, which of course is that possibly we have a budget. Does that mean anything good for CPS?
Well, it sounds like we're going to get universal free preschool for 4-year-olds. I mean, the mayor already made this announcement, and when asked how they were going to pay for it, he said he's going to use the extra state money.
Which hasn't been passed yet.
Which hasn't been passed yet. And also, you know, I mean, I know the mayor appoints the school board, but it's not like the school board has approved a budget or made any decisions. I mean, I guess sometimes you sort of look for like process, right? Like first, before you say that you announce something, you actually like get it through the.
Wait a minute, now how long have you been in Chicago?
Well, I'm not saying that this is unusual, but I'm just saying, like, come on.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. It seems a little it's A, premature, but B, it's sort of like if you're going to put in universal full day preschool coming up this fall, you better announce it. You should have probably announced it 3 or 4 months ago.
Well,
so
you know the rule of the 3 press releases, right? You have a pre-announcement press release, and then you have an announcement press release, and then you have a press release to announce that you've announced it, right?
Yes.
And this was only the first press release, a press conference, but.
And by the way, we all received a press release from Progress Illinois, that total bipartisan group, praising Rahm's decision to have universal free preschool.
They got that together pretty quickly.
They did, and then we got a long email with like everybody and their mother from some student at Kennedy King College or something, or Truman College, praising it to, you know.
Praising Mayor Emanuel.
Praising Mayor Emanuel to, you know, the head of the Erickson Institute, and so that was, you know, at the ready.
Okay.
And I'll go back to the budget for just a second. I mean, I'll say that a lack of state budget the last couple of summers was pretty disastrous for Chicago public schools and for families who are trying to figure out what to do with their kids. I mean, when did they get the last budget deal? Like, there was like weeks. I mean, some districts had already started in the state, and CPS had like weeks to go, and there was still just so much uncertainty. So getting a state budget like before, you know, June, before July even, it would be an improvement on the last couple of years.
So help me understand this a little bit better than I do, because the mayor had this big campaign style announcement yesterday that we're going to get universal pre-K for 4-year-olds for every kid in Chicago by 2022 or something. But they're, as I understand it, going to use this extra money, however much it is, that they're going to be getting from the state, although there's no guarantee that they're going to ever get it after this year. And also, it would seem to me that the hole is so big that you'd think that if they got a few extra million, they'd want to use it to sort of repair some of the damage that's been done the last couple of years instead of announce a big, expensive new initiative. But that's just me, I guess.
You said it. We didn't say it. I mean, I think that some people question that. I mean, we heard from some advocates that said that, it's kind of curious to do this right now. But this, I mean, we are revving up for a mayoral election, so it's not.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
And the mayor has had some problems with some of his school policies. I mean, this is something like, this isn't new that he's wanted to have this universal preschool for as many kids as possible. So.
He has talked about it for a long time.
He has been talking about it for a long time, and now is making this move to maybe try to change the conversation a little bit about what's been going on at the schools.
And it should be said that, I mean, pretty much everybody who cares about these things does agree that we need to be doing more for our 4-year-olds, and pre-K is probably a real good thing. And for a big city like ours, if you could guarantee it free of charge to everybody, that would be a pretty stunning achievement.
Totally and completely, and I think it's something that families would be really excited about too. And if we had all the money in the world, this would be an absolute no-brainer. But there are just choices that have to be made at Chicago Public Schools, because it doesn't have all the money in the world. And so is this the best use of extra money that would be coming in?
Now there is pre-K now for some kids, right?
Yeah, a lot of kids. Well, actually in the last couple of years, the number of kids in preschool has actually dropped, and some of that just has to do with like birth rates and just general enrollment. But yes, I think it's about 20,000 kids already in preschool in CPS.
And then there's different kinds of preschool. Different programs depending on where what your income is, but there aren't enough spots at the schools. If you're paying for it, it's really expensive. I've looked at it myself for my now 4-year-old, and there are no guarantees. And plus, once you're in the school, there's no guarantee that you get to stay for kindergarten and through the rest. So,
well, I mean, I think I saw in your story, isn't it $13,000 a year or something?
Fran Spielman, it'll be almost $14,000 for this year coming up if you're at the top of the sliding scale.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, you're at Oscar Mayer school.
Right, then it's free. Thank goodness for that.
Another great story you guys have been on. Explain Oscar Mayer, the anomaly of Oscar Mayer.
What is the fastest way to explain Oscar Mayer?
It's sort of rooted in, it's rooted in the idea that we want to attract neighborhood people to neighborhood schools.
Yeah.
It just happens to be in the richest neighborhood in the city of Chicago.
Okay.
And when they put this in, at the time, it was the school was not reflective of the community. It was mostly Black and Latino, and now it has switched. And now people from the neighborhood are accessing Oscar Mayer, but the preschool is still free, and yet this is like the richest neighborhood in the city of Chicago.
And here was the goofy quirk here when they when they gave it a magnet program about 10 years ago. Usually magnet means you go citywide, and so you have a lottery because more people want to get into your magnet program than you have space for. And some will offer a little preference for people who live nearby and things like that. And the other two magnet preschool programs, actually the other 3, are citywide, and you have to compete for these couple of spots, except at Oscar Mayer, where they decided that kids who live in the Boundary and siblings of children in the higher grades would automatically get first dibs on all of the spots. And that ended up resulting, this is all the Inspector General of CPS, Nick Schuler, did all of this investigation and analysis, but I think the final number was that in the last 5 years, they've let in 4 kids from outside the richest school boundary in the entire city. So if you have a 4-year-old, speaking of 4-year-old preschool, there are only 4 citywide programs you can compete to get into, and one of them, the biggest one, has basically been off the table for at least the last 5 years.
So it's essentially a private school in a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways.
Except that we're all paying for it.
Except that we're all paying for it, yes.
Yeah, instead of the people who use it. Yeah, so it's a kind of an interesting little anomaly. It really is a sort of a true neighborhood school in the grand tradition.
Apparently, in the neighborhood, it was one of those secrets that everyone knew. I mean, if you live here, you can just get your 4-year-old into this beautiful. If you've ever paid for Montessori preschool, the IG estimated that it would be about $30,000 benefit for 2 years of preschool. Wow. So that's
not
a lot pocket change.
Yeah, yeah. Where is this school? Where is Oscar Mayer?
It's like Lincoln Park area.
Lincoln Park. That would make some sense. All right. So the reason that I convened this meeting today, ladies, is because of this thing. The University of Chicago Consortium on School Research did something called School Closings in Chicago, which, we have right here at this table, we have some great investigative reporters, and it is an investigation of sorts, but it was really just a matter of crunching a bunch of numbers that needed to be crunched, and it was a good public service. I pulled this quote from it. Our findings show that closing schools, now we're talking about 2013 with the so-called 50 schools that were closed, right? Wasn't actually 50, it was 48 and a half or something, but whatever, that we all know what we're talking about. Our findings show that closing schools caused large disruptions without clear benefits for students. That's the conclusion of this great big 50-page book.
And it's actually stunning, because if you think about the last couple of years and consortium reports, this is one organization that gets all the data from CPS. And most of their reports over the last couple of years have been very complimentary of what's happened in the school district. And I've been waiting on this report and asking about this report for like 2 years, because they originally, right after the school closings, they did a report. And they said that most kids got into slightly better schools than the schools that they had been in. But they said, we're going to do another report in 2 years. But this is, like almost 5-6 years later. Yeah. And they finally did the report. And, I think that there was a lot of negotiation in having a report that was, I think, pretty damning of the whole process. I mean, it wasn't just the test scores that didn't go up as much as other kids, but it was that the way people described what happened in the schools that the kids from closed schools went to was really very disturbing. I mean, the people showed up there and boxes were on the floor. They couldn't find, teachers who buy a lot of their own material for their classrooms couldn't find the material. There was increased fighting, increased bullying. It just did not sound like, like a well thought out process. And yet CPS spent, $50 million to make the welcoming schools welcoming, and also, multi-million dollars on like logistics people and moving people, and yet and
those contracts kept going up and up and up 2 or 3 times.
It was supposed to be like $14 million. I think it ended at like $33 million or something crazy like that. So I mean,
and you both your shops did those great reports on, what was it, Von Humboldt, or with the school where they were storing everything, and it was just an unbelievable mess.
And then we were there. That was my first year of this job, basically. Yeah. And I heard all these predictions. As it turned out, they were predictions about it's really hard to merge school cultures, and we do feel like it's us versus them, and the new kids versus the old kids, and all of that. And the U Chicago researchers didn't just crunch numbers; they also did in-depth interviews at 6 of these school communities to really talk to people about how did this feel, and what did it look like, and how did it go. And our editorial board, which of course is totally separate from me, but the first line of their editorial was, "We told you so," because they predicted some of this too. Like it's hard. This is hard work, and to do 48 of these all at once, and then more coming right.
To do 1 or 2 would be difficult. To do 50 or however many, I slogged my way through it myself, and at the end of it, I kind of had 2 sort of general conclusions, just personal reactions to it. The first is that academically, it wasn't a good thing, but it wasn't a disaster. It wasn't disastrous. But socially is where it just completely came apart.
Though I would sort of argue, because while it wasn't like a disaster, like they didn't tank, you have to imagine that the kids at these schools, these were poor performing schools.
Yeah.
The kids at these schools could hardly stand to not progress as fast as they
Absolutely
progress. And one of the things that was pretty, disturbing is that it looks like now, years later, initially GPAs did not drop, grade point averages, but now these kids who are getting into middle school and high school,
Yes.
they're seeing lower GPAs. So the question is like, okay, what is the long-term effect? I mean, if you're seeing lower GPAs, are you going to see higher dropout rates? Are you going to see, higher kids, winding up in alternative schools from these schools? And they already, I mean, you're talking about kids that already had a high probability of struggling. And so we just the school district just made it so that they're going to struggle just a little bit more.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
is that,
yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about the kids that are going to Oscar Mayer. We're talking about the kids
Yes,
who,
exactly right.
are going to some of the worst schools in the school district.
Well, I didn't mean to cut you off, Lauren, but the thing the line that got me was that the students got essentially what they got was assimilation into the schools. This whole notion that the schools are going to be knitted together and that it's just going to be one big happy new school. What really happened is you had kids who were there and kids who came in, and the kids who came in had to assimilate into the world that they were in. And it was even worse for staff, and I can imagine being a teacher getting thrown into this.
The researchers said, I try to ask, so what, did anything surprise you? Was there anything you found that you were not expecting? And that was one of the things that they said caught them off guard, that the staff said, we needed so much more support, and we're glad the kids we're glad there was stuff in place for the kids, but if, we needed more too, for all of us. And we needed it to go more than just 1 year, and we needed it to continue.
11 or a 12-year-old is a little bit more adaptable than some of us older folks are, I'm sure. But it just, I mean, I remember we were having this debate right here for all that time about this idea that this is just crazy. I mean, what are you doing here? There was that whole debate about the gang lines, which, again, didn't turn out to be apparently quite as big as everybody thought it would be. But some of that was because of the safe passage that apparently worked.
And they didn't do the big kids. They left high schools off
That's
the
right,
table
they left the high school
altogether.
kids
These little
out,
kids.
Right. But still, the idea that, and I guess, this is another thing. I had forgotten, or maybe I didn't even know, how many of the welcoming schools didn't end up being in the schools that were welcoming schools.
Right.
It was, how many was it, like 19 schools, 18 or 19 schools? They had to move to yet another school, so everybody moved.
Yes.
Yeah, it was
What a
very
mess.
it was very hard to even as a reporter now, when I try and remember, okay, this is this school, but it used to be this school,
Right.
but it's in this building.
Right,
And
right.
it's just sort of where am
Yeah,
I? Where am
yeah,
I going?
yeah,
When I
yeah.
try and drive somewhere,
Right.
where am I going? It's
Right.
hard to even keep track. It's crazy. Some of the buildings that they're a different school, but etched into the school is the old school name, so
Yeah.
it's highly confusing.
Yeah. Did Chicago win anything? Did Chicago benefit in any way from this? Can you think of any positive way that Chicago is better because this was done?
Well, you have to imagine we
next
saved
question.
some. You have to imagine that some money is being saved. I mean, as much as we don't know exactly, we never did get a detailed accounting of the cost savings and how they were going to save money. But I mean, we do have fewer principals, fewer teachers. The buildings don't have to be repaired.
They took a bunch of big old buildings totally off the books. And even if they've spent a little bit to secure them and to just sort of, keep them locked down, it's not anything close to probably what they would have had to spend to redo the roof, to redo the boilers, to fix big capital kinds of problems.
So that was really what this was all about, wasn't it? It was really just trying to save some money on the physical plants.
Right.
Yes.
The conversation started out as it was going to also save money, and then all of a sudden it changed to maybe not going to save money.
Yeah.
That talking point disappeared.
And then, as I recall, the talking point changed. Oh no, it's nothing about the building. It's making a better academic environment for our kids, because every single kid who is from a losing school, a closing school, is going to go to a better school. And it doesn't look like even that completely happened.
Right, because the year after, even the first initial investments, they say in this report that a year after, a lot of them disappeared. So, maybe you got an extra tech coordinator for that brand new lab. That technical coordinator was probably gone the year later because a lot of these schools continued to see population losses, so that meant less money.
And they weren't drastically better schools that kids were being assigned to. They were some of them were somewhat better schools. There were a couple cases of they were better, but
one of the things that the report makes very, very clear, and I think was kind of lost in this discussion, is that when you talk about this is the closing school and this is the welcoming school, as though they're going to this much better school, the welcoming school until the day before was just another school that would have been closed. I mean, it just happens to be that they won to be called the welcoming school, and they got that new computer lab and a few iPads or something. But it's not like you're moving these kids to Oscar Mayer. You're moving them to a school that's just down the street that's pretty much just as traumatic as the one they're leaving.
That could have been on the same, CPS had this level system or tier system for rating the schools. And in a lot of cases, the kids were moving to a level that was the same number as their school. And CPS would point to we'll look at the point system behind where they got to this level, and the points would be higher. But I mean, some level 3 kids ended up at another level 3 school.
And then you have to, that's definitely true, and then you have to remember that only 60% of kids went to the welcoming schools.
That's right.
So the other 40% wound up all over, and actually I don't think the consortium really looked at how many of those kids actually got to much better schools. But initially I did a story where I got, where each child went, and it was very, very few went to level 1 or 1+ schools, which previous consortium research showed that in order to really make a difference in a kid's life, going from a level 2 or 3 school, you got to go to a 1 or 1, or forget these levels. These are sort of manufactured things. What this is test scores and growth and attendance rates and things like that. If you go to a school that's way better in those ways, then that's really helpful.
And that was another thing that was new to me, was the incredible number of people who just left the whole thing behind, including the kids in the welcoming schools. Their parents whipped them out of those schools and put them in other schools too.
Yeah.
I mean, hundreds and hundreds of kids.
Right.
It was a lot of disruption. And I mean, so the new CEO, Janice Jackson, whose elementary school once was threatened with closure, and she was not happy about that at that time. She
the one that she was principal of?
No.
She actually was a child.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
She has said, on her watch, there won't be any of these wholesale school closings, but she won't commit to not closing schools. She won't commit to closing schools as a last resort, and she has 5 school closures to her name, I would say, already at this point in her first year.
Well, this of course this broadens the topic beyond the school closings report, but I don't know, it just seems like when we're talking about school closings, you look at something like what's going on in Englewood with the 4 high schools, and one of the things that we've just hammered on so often around here is this idea that as we saw in Englewood, I'm losing my help me, somebody rescue me. I was about to say something about
many schools, 4 schools in Englewood. All the high schools are going in Englewood, and so the question is, can you do it better? Now, one thing about it is that she's phasing out a couple of these schools, right? So they're not actually closing this June, but the question is are they? There's still been a lot of trauma. For one thing, these kids have had to fight for their schools. And for the other thing, that even the schools that are being left open, like Hope High School or Team Englewood, they're probably going to have very, very few kids. And there's a big question about whether they can afford even any type of curriculum that would make it decent to stay in those schools. So, if we were in, I guess, a perfect world with lots of money, they could build up some really robust programs in those schools, but they're not going to do that.
Or they would let them go to the new Englewood school.
Yeah.
Is another possibility.
Well, I just realized the point that just dropped out of my head is this whole thing about the arguments against these schools is that their enrollments are dropping so precipitously, and of course, as you guys were the first to report, that's due more because of the internal competition that CPS set up with itself. I mean, we have all of these charter schools and special schools and everything that are kind of dissipating the school populations, and so a lot of these neighborhood schools are finding themselves having to compete with other neighborhood schools.
And CPS's own, I mean, their own special programs are part of this too. There have been some more selective schools built on the south and southwest side, so there's just so many more options for all kids to go to. But absent, conspicuously absent from all these conversations about how sad the enrollments are in these 4 Englewood schools is CPS's role in getting to that point where, I mean, your reporting on Hope High School was just so beautiful in the way that you told the story of how 10 years ago Hope was like a really nice place to
Excellent
be.
piece, yeah.
And now
it's nothing. And when you look at the schools that open, I mean, there's just so many schools that open near there, and they're losing population. So between the two things, I actually think in that piece, the one thing that this teacher said to me, so I asked him, why didn't you guys try and market your school? Because that's always sort of the thing, market your school, and then maybe you, and he's like, well, we started losing money, we started losing programs. What are we going to market? What are we going to tell people? Like, we're going to knock on their door and be like, come to our school. We don't have the things to sell them.
And then that's where student-based budgeting comes into the whole thing, because
that's exactly
that's where the real, whatever you want to call it, this brutal competition where it's just you're sort of like you're just up against your neighbor, and you just, one of you is going to survive maybe, but you have to cannibalize your neighbor to get there. All right, let's move on, because we've got so many things on our agenda today. Lauren, I loved your piece on filthy schools.
Did you?
I thought it was just
Did you?
such a great piece. And I want to, by introduction, say that according to your reporting, quoting yourself, back at yourself, we have good news, because 70% of 150 of 200 schools that have been inspected have passed.
Yes, we were told last week.
Whatever that means.
We were told.
So a third of
That
100.
was the report to the board at the board meeting.
Yes.
And how could you be a board member and get that and say, what? What does that mean? Give me the number. How many schools have passed? Not 70% of 150 of 200.
And one thing that we don't know is like when they pass. So, I did this small story on this school in Washington Park where they didn't pass, like 2 inspections, and then they had this like big cleaning where they like walked in and like threw all the teacher stuff all around and cleaned all the crevices of the school, and then they passed. Well, I mean, yeah, that's like, that's like going to the dentist after you get your teeth cleaned and fixed and being like, how's my teeth look? I mean, of course you're going to pass then. I mean, it's sort of, so we don't know if when they say that they passed, we don't know if we're talking about they passed the first time or they passed after this like magic blitz cleaning.
Don't say magic.
Not magic, or like wonderful.
Sodexo magic.
That's right.
But the initial round of these blitz inspections, as they're calling them, were like, they were quiet. They were under the radar. I mean, CPS sent these pairs of people in, and the principal would know the morning of, because the principal needed to let them in and unlock doors and things like that. But it wasn't widely known that this was happening, and then sort of the weight of what this could mean was certainly not known. But now it is. And now it's clear the district has announced that all of the schools are going to get inspected by the end of the year. So, I mean, how could conditions not be better, given that everyone knows inspections are coming, and if you fail yours or it's really hideous, you're maybe going to end up on the front page of the paper again.
Right.
I think that fear might have something to, and honestly,
Maybe a little bit.
Arnie Rivera, who's now the chief operating officer of CPS and kind of in charge of this world, said, I mean, he thought that human effort had something to do with maybe why things were doing better, just because people had been sort of scared straight.
Is it fair to blame this, at least in large part, on the privatization of these services, Sodexo Magic and Aramark? I mean, virtually these are the 2 companies that are responsible for everything now, right? So we make this big deal that we're going to basically get rid of all the people who used to work for the Board of Education, and either move them over to or have these private companies come in and run everything. And a year later or whatever it is, you take a look at it and it's a mess.
Well, they cut the number of custodians by what was it, half? It was a huge amount of custodians that they lost. So it's like privatization. And how can you make money on this? The one way you can make money is to cut the custodians. Right. It's not like you're going to make money on, there's not other ways to make money. And I mean, private companies, they don't do business where they're not going to make money. I mean, so I think there's a correlation there.
And then maybe CPS underestimated how much oversight these private vendors would need by CPS, that they would need a little bit more vendor management than they had been getting. Yeah. But one of the other pieces of this, which I also reported on, is that, anytime someone would go to the board and say, kids from Kelly High School, kids from Curie would come in and say, we have no soap, there's trash in the lunchroom all the time, CPS would point to these APA 2, in the industry term, inspections that were done once a year and say, but the school passed, the school passed, the school passed, the school passed. Yeah. So maybe you had a bad day, or there were always reasons why CPS would say basically these contracts are working, except that the cleaning crews were being tipped off about when the inspector was coming. So again, they would kind of flood the zone.
That was a very important piece of this.
Supplies would magically appear, and requests would be approved that wouldn't normally be. And I mean, I give the janitors who spoke on the record with their names and faces a lot of credit for doing that, because they basically said they cheated. They cheated to pass these inspections.
This is the part that I have just never understood. So you have a building, and you have in the old days, you had a certain number of janitors and custodians of various sorts and an engineer who were responsible for keeping the building running and making it clean and everything else. And then you bring in a private firm. Now, there's a cost for all of these people that's built into the school's budget, but now suddenly you're bringing in a private company that needs to make money. And they need to do the same job, but they also need to make a profit. And they're supposed to do it for less, because that's how they got the contract in the first place. We're gonna clean all these schools for less than you're currently paying. There's only two ways to do it. You pay people a lot less, and you just do a lot less service. I just don't see how else it can be done.
At the time that it was sold, which was several administrations ago, the companies, at least the cleaning company, Aramark, that just did janitorial, said, we've got all these, we've got technology, we have different kinds of machines, we can use fewer people and get the same result because of these floor cleaners we have and all these other kinds of things that include no actual mops and buckets. So that was sort of one of their selling points, that they would not need as many people, except these are schools, they're not hospitals. There's stuff all over, the floors get old. I mean, there's just, it didn't work as well as it was.
And have they had to increase the amount of money that they're paying these companies since the initial contract? I've lost track of that. I don't know.
It's a difficult question, because they're changing the model of what they're doing. They're changing it so that now, for Aramark, now they have had some pilot schools that were like this before, but for Aramark now they're going to take over everything, including like pest control and snow removal, and they're paying them more. So. And it's one sort of like conundrum in this whole thing, is that because you can't like go to CPS's budget in 2012 and figure out precisely what were they paying for what we're getting now then, because it was like folded into school budgets and folded into different parts of the budget, and so it's not like
some was in the school budget and some was in the regional budget,
and so it's like it's all these different layers. And then to look at like, okay, now what is the apples to apples comparison for today? Are we saving money, and if so, how much are we saving? It's just very, as would have it, it's very hard to figure out. And I mean, whether that's by design or just because of, we've had several administrations.
And then there haven't just been, big annual contracts where you can then look and see year over year. They did the initial push, which was a big chunk of money up front. And then they decided to move into this other model, but getting into that. So initially Aramark was just cleaning schools, period, and engineers were overseeing all the snow removal and pest control and repairs and things like that. And now everyone is moving to this model where, right, the private company just oversees all the facilities things. So anyway, they just keep doing these little extensions here, 9 months here for this much, and then we'll extend this part over here. And so untangling all of those threads is not easy.
Well, as our former mayor said, if there's a rat in your sandwich or a mouse in your salad, you want to know, right?
You want to know.
You want to know.
That
Okay, now moving along, the other great story that's been unearthed by the people sitting right here at our table today.
The person.
Well, yes, but I'm saying these are all stories. Lauren FitzPatrick is here today with the Chicago Sun-Times, and Sarah Karp is here from WBEZ, for those of you listening on the podcast and not watching us. You know, I just realized something. We were going to play these videos, and I completely forgot about them. Let's do that first, shall we?
Sure.
This has to do with the mayor. Well, let's just watch this first thing because it has to do with Janice Jackson. This is a video that got released just a couple of days ago, and it caused a little bit of an uproar. Let's watch it.
I'm Janice Jackson. I grew up in Chicago. I'm proud to have been a CPS student, teacher, and parent, and now CEO of Chicago Public Schools. And I'm proud of the progress we've made, becoming a national leader in academic improvement, with more kids than ever graduating and going to college. We fought hard to get our fair share of education funding, but our progress towards equity and fairness has just begun. Stand strong for Chicago Public Schools.
So, Lauren, Franz Millman at your newspaper reported that Lori Lightfoot got very upset about this and said that this was essentially Janice Jackson doing a paid commercial for Rahm Emanuel.
It doesn't look not like a campaign commercial. There are a lot of things about this this spot that have the quotes up on the screen and Janice strolling through neighborhoods and talking about improvements, and then there's the little paid for tag at the very end of it. At first glance, and I heard it on the radio a couple weeks ago before I saw it, and thought that that's what was kind of maybe what was going on.
So is this a misstep for her to have allowed herself to be put into that? Should she have not done that?
Well, the group is, kind of non-partisan, so it's not technically a campaign commercial.
Okay.
This is the question. I mean, what is the reason? Like, what are they trying to? A commercial tries to sell you something, right?
Yeah.
So, to what end are we trying to sell the public school system? Now, it doesn't end with like something like, come enroll your child because we need more enrollment. It doesn't say to people like, that was my first question. I actually saw it on cable TV one night, and I couldn't sleep for many hours. It was so disturbing to me. But because I just can't, what is the end game? What is the reason for this commercial? I mean, nobody can answer. Progress Illinois, their whole point is to sell Chicago, but to what end? Is it to Amazon? Is it why are we selling Chicago?
There are plenty of critics who are saying, well, it's just they're not. They're selling Rahm Emanuel to Chicago.
Well, I'm not going to be one of those people, but I'm going to say that it does make me wonder what is it? Why did she do this? What was the purpose of her doing this?
Well, if you see her role, and I don't want to put words into her mouth, but I think she sees part of her role as she has to stabilize the ship that has ousted two of its leaders. One's in prison. There were so many mid-year cuts. There have been how many thousands of kids leaving the district the last couple of years that I think it's possible she thinks she's selling stability and we're doing better. Buy back into this system. Don't leave. Send your kids. That is maybe a generous way of looking at it.
I totally agree with you that one of her most important jobs isn't even running the schools. It's attempting to make the schools look stable.
Which is why I think she also talks so much about how long she has been in the system. And this is someone who has bought in since she was a tiny kid and sends her own kids. So she does buy into the system. But I think that's why you hear a lot about her longevity at CPS, to show that it is stable enough that it has now produced a school superintendent.
So The CTU, never to be outdone, put out their own little video, which I think just dropped this morning. Let's watch that.
So Ram's hired another CPS CEO, his fifth one in 6 years. And his billionaire friends are spending a ton of money hoping we'll forget the damage they've done to our public schools. You remember him, don't you? The teacher strike guy, the ethics violator, the convict, and his former chief education advisor. And their biggest achievement? Closing 60+ schools in Black and brown neighborhoods. A new CEO, whatever, but a new mayor would be much better.
So that's a slightly different view from people who aren't as enamored of Rahm Emanuel's let's say stewardship of the Chicago public school system. Any comment on that? Did that mean anything? Does that add to the dialogue in any way?
Well, if anything, maybe it shows how that initial Janice Jackson commercial sort of backfired, because now, so early in the game, in the game being the political game, you're getting a negative commercial that's very negative. And if part of Rahm Emanuel's campaign is going to be how great the schools are, he's already seeing where that can not sort of blow up in his face. And so
that's a very good point. Yeah.
And then as much as he and the district have been promoting their CEO as the face and sort of the backbone of what's going on, the CTU is there reminding you that, look who's backing her. I mean, he's physically touching the back of her.
That's a nasty little piece of tape there. I mean, wow. That was one of my reactions to it. Was like, I mean, this was an innocent moment when they're walking from the podium and he just puts his hand on her shoulder, but by slowing it down and processing the video, it makes it look like he's
giving her a massage.
And the CTU is reminding you that she is, in theory, she is the CEO of Chicago Public Schools, but she still has a boss that she answers to.
Right.
And guess what? It's this guy. It's this Mayor Rahm Emanuel.
Yeah. Okay, so let's make our last thing this something we should have done a half an hour on by itself, but the special education scandal. It's hard to figure out where to even begin with this, but again, some absolutely stellar reporting. Well, can you give us like a 30-second capsule? No, just do that first, and then we'll go off from there. What did you find?
Well, I have to say that most of the credit goes to the parents and the advocates who came to many, many Board of Education meetings and just complained a lot about what was going on in the schools and with special education students. And, at some point, I just started saying, like, is there something there? Is there something going on? And what I was able to discover is that they Chicago Public Schools had implemented this procedure manual that was at least helped to be written by auditors that Claypool had hired. And this manual, while CPS says there were other purposes to this manual, it led to delays and denials of services for children and helped to accomplish budget cuts that CPS implemented. The state came in and looked at it, and they found essentially the same thing, that a lot of the things, I mean, what it was basically, it would say, like, in order to get an aid for your child, like somebody to help your child, let's say use the bathroom, that's what sometimes aides do, or help them read, you had to fill out like 50 pages of paperwork, like every minute of every second of the day. How is that aid going to be used? It was a very unrealistic amount of paperwork, and so it led to it being difficult to get an aid. And so then you save money when you don't have to pay for that aid. And so the state said that this was a violation of the federal law that governs disability education for children who are disabled. And now the state has a monitor that's going to have to sign off on everything that CPS does in terms of special education.
It's a really remarkable story because in the end, I guess they did spend less money, right?
Yes, it wasn't a huge amount, but
it was about 20 million or something, or 15?
About 30 million, I
30.
think that, but even that, you talk about like earmark and privatization, it's actually really hard to track, because at the exact same time that they implemented all these changes, they changed the way that they funded special education. So it was really sort of, it wasn't easy. It's not like you could just look at this line item versus this line item and be like, okay, they saved that amount of money. And I had many arguments with CPS people about how can you figure it out, because it seems to me like we need budgets in which you can compare apples to apples without doing like 7 somersaults and a jump off the high dive. You have to be able to figure it out,
And of course, one of the most heartbreaking things you showed is that the poorest kids of color were the ones who got screwed the worst, because their parents didn't understand the system, or couldn't hire attorneys to get what they wanted, or just make the noise to make sure their own children had what they needed. So now you're talking about saving money on poor Black and brown kids
who are disabled, who are probably we can say this, the least likely to graduate, the least likely to to have a good experience in Chicago public schools already. And these are the kids that we're going to save money.
Right.
And they try
Let's save money there.
Let's save money there.
Yeah.
Let's save money.
Well, quoting you back to yourself, the cutbacks at CPS's district-run schools meant there were 350 fewer special education teachers and 76 fewer aides in 2017 compared to the year before.
And I actually have to say something that so this was a big fight with CPS, but the state, I really wanted to figure out the aides picture, like how many fewer aides, and they had told me, Chicago Public Schools had told me there's no way to figure that out, that as far as like the minutes served. But the state, they were able to produce documents when the state did their investigation, and it turned out that the number of minutes the kids were spending with aides was cut in half. It went from like 14 million to 7 million in 1 year. And so when they, I have to say the CPS fought. Prior to coming out with this story, I had sat on it for a week going over my numbers with CPS. Every number that was in that story, they knew about beforehand. We hashed out. I changed some to respect what they thought was reality. And then afterwards, they said that it was completely wrong. And I mean, Forrest Claypool, gave a soliloquy at a board meeting about how wrong it was, sent out letters to like every single solitary stakeholder in Chicago Public Schools. I mean, they really, really, really fought it.
They fought
it. I mean, it was pretty crazy, but in the end, the picture that the state paints is actually far worse than even what I was able to get my hands on.
Yeah. So is it fair to ask where things are at now? I mean, my impression is that either by her own volition or the mayor has given her permission to, but Janice Jackson seems to be very often coming back in as the mop-up person and saying, well, this got a little out of hand, but now I'm in charge and we're going to do it better. Is that what's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, they just totally abandoned that other way of funding schools that they changed to. They just said, oh, we got to go back to the first way,
right.
Because that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to put more money into special education, and whether it will equal so that they'll be made whole, I don't know. But she's definitely said that this is a priority of hers. Whether there's a long, the problem also is that special education was not like a great thing in Chicago Public Schools prior to these reforms. It's just that these reforms made it way worse. And so it's, if you really want to fix special ed, it might not only take making it going to where we were, it might take going further.
Yeah.
But she has spent the first 6 months, 6 months now, kind of dealing with policies that were put in place before she took over.
And in some cases, walking them back.
In some cases, walking them back.
Yeah.
In fact, with Earmark and Sodexo, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next year or so they do get completely changed. That whole system gets changed.
There are clauses in the contracts that basically let CPS walk away at any point with, I can't remember if it's 30 or 60 days, but they basically say, thank you so much, we're done now,
Wow.
except who will then clean the schools.
Right. That's the only problem. That's
Which
the only
is a legitimate concern. I mean, now you can't have like literally nobody cleaning the schools. But
Did all the people who were CPS employees who were cleaning the schools, did they all get fired, or did they get subsumed into the contract, or what happened?
No, and the simplest way to say it is that there are about 800 CPS directly employed custodians who are still there, The engineers are now being privatized, so some of them will move to the new companies. Some might not end up getting rehired. And I think that's kind of everybody.
But wait a minute, the 800 people, these are cleaning people, janitors,
Yes.
and that sort of, they still work for the Chicago Public Schools?
Yes.
So it's really what we were hiring. What we were hiring
Wait a
Earmark
minute,
to
didn't
do.
we privatize it?
Well, we were hiring Earmark to manage them. So it's like their paycheck comes from CPS. Their bosses are Earmark people.
And
it's
how
a
much
very
are we
weird
paying
setot.
these two companies? I'm sorry, that may be
It's a
hard.
lot.
40 million or something.
It's a lot.
Something like that. 39.
So we're
40 million.
paying.
Here's the one thing I do want to say
I don't
about
understand.
both of these stories, which is, I mean, some of the best reporting that comes out of CPS, I mean, it starts with families. It starts with students. It starts with people who
That's right.
they go to the board and they try to say, please help us. We're having a problem with whatever's going on the ground.
Yeah.
And then enough time goes by that we see they don't get results. And then it's
Yeah.
like, well, let's see what's actually going on here. And no, they're right.
Well, we're down to our last 2 minutes. We've gobbled up the entire show here, but let me throw this question out just as an open-ended question to end the show with. Does Janice Jackson have enough autonomy that she could actually seriously begin to change things and make things different / better, or does she just follow orders?
It's not clear.
No.
I know
wish we knew.
it's
not
not
clear.
clear, and I know it's an unfair question to end with, but that question sort of hangs in the air for me in all of this. It's like,
Although-
well, who is she? Can she do something?
And you're not alone. I mean, as I talk with folks all over the place over coffee, on the phone, little chit chat, gossip here and there, that comes up a lot. How much freedom will she be given?
Right.
Now, during this election year, I'm guessing it's not going to be a whole lot. The last time there was an election, I mean, the couple of board meetings right before, the agenda was like this big. There were no real decisions being made, just renewals of things. So this might not be the best time to really try to get at the truth of that, because I think everyone is being kept on a pretty tight leash. But
Now, if I were her, I'm not her. I would be like, I got a lot of power right now.
Yes.
She has a lot of power. I mean, the last thing Rahm Emanuel needs is her starring in commercials to get mad at him.
Yeah.
I mean, she could go in there and be like, no, I don't want.
Especially with his hand on her shoulder.
I don't want this. I don't want that. But you know what? I think this last budget to schools, I actually thought that they were going to do some things that were more dramatic, that would work on equity, and they didn't do it. And that was actually a signal to me that she's not able to do everything that she wants to do, because I think that she's been wanting to change the way schools are budgeted for a while, but she didn't. And so I think that was a telling sign.
I just have a feeling there's a bunch of politico types in Chicago keeping an eye on this and thinking, we all know Rahm's going to get reelected. That's a given, and she's going to have a period of about 2 years in that first 2 years of Rahm's third term, and he's not going to run for a fourth term. This is not me talking. I'm just saying. Politicos are saying. So she's got like 2 years to just be stunning, and then to just leave when her star is at the highest, put together her campaign, and she's mayor in 4 years. That's what I think some people are thinking.
maybe.
Maybe.
I
Who knows?
I'm not sure. But she does, he needs her right now more than she needs him, is the bottom line.
Right,
so if
right,
she has a
right.
wish list, like the Diet High School folks, the last time there was a mayoral election, I mean, now is the time to ask for
Now's
what
the
you
time.
want,
Yeah,
because
that's a good example. Diet High School is a good example. Well, we could go on for hours, but we're not going to. We have to let you get back to your jobs. You have stories to tell. And I'll say again what I said at the top of the show. I'm so proud to know you guys. I think you just do spectacular work, and I just always enjoy reading and hearing you on the radio and in print, and good luck to you both.
thanks for
Thank
pulling
you.
this together.
Yes.
Lauren FitzPatrick from the Chicago Sun-Times, Sarah Karp from WBEZ, and you have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It is a production of CAN TV. We're here all the time. We're here every week. Glad you check us out. I think we're going to get back to our mayoral sweepstakes next week. We may have a mayoral candidate in here. We'll see. If not, maybe we'll talk about something else. But you check us out and see. And don't forget, you can watch all of our shows by going to this address at any time. And you can listen to us on SoundCloud to hear our podcast, or on iTunes, Apple. And as we always say, if that's not good enough, we'll come out and do a show in your garage, whatever it takes, okay? All right, thanks for watching. See you next week. Bye-bye.